What I want to do right now is talk about some of our research around what creates a truly meaningful life. And what I decided to do is bring in a little bit of content from 4 different 10-week classes in the next 50 minutes to share with you. From the work on AI, we have a class on designing AI for well-being. This is taught with Fei Li in the engineering school and the business school. Second class is sustainable human behavior, which is taught in the Doors School as well as the GSB with Suchi Wang. And then a little bit of work from our humor serious business class, as well as some of our work in the Power of Story class, which is lives in the business school, but also is one of the classes that's really unlocked more globally within the LEAD program at Stanford. So I'm going to talk really fast and ask you a few questions, and we'll integrate all of this work into sort of the next 50 minutes. First, don't need to tell you, we're living in what feels to be surreal, very unusual times. And there's a confluence of factors that are driving that. We're feeling this in the day-to-day. Certainly we know that AI has fueled massive change, and whenever you get that sort of non-linear acceleration of change within our businesses and our lives, you can feel uncertain. What is the meaning of humanity, being human? By the way, I actually put that into GPT yesterday. What is the difference between a human and AI? You know, because you like to have a conversation with GPT about that. Fun fact, what GPT reports is, you know, basically 6 or 7 differences. Consciousness, for now, at least, spirituality, emotion, creativity, a sense of moral decision-making, and a sense of purpose. So wanted to seed those ideas because several of those themes will come up in today's conversation. The second is that trust is at an all-time low, and it's not just trust in institutions, it's also trust in our leaders, it's trust in data, and this global trust deficit has been only increasing in the last sort of 2 decades. We also know that general well-being is on the decline, that burnout has been reported at extraordinarily high levels, that mental well-being, especially among our teens, has been on the decline. You see work by Jonathan Haidt and others that isolate some of the factors that are drawing this. So it's a precipice of time. We're on this precipice of making decisions of how we want to live and how we want to lead in different ways moving forward. So I'm going to talk and unify this class, this session around this idea of what is purpose, which I'll define as a sense of fulfillment that comes from living a life of meaning. What's so clear in this room is the meaning that is created from the connections, from this overall sense of what we're doing and why, and where we're moving forward in the future. And so this is not a talk that will come in ways that are surprising to you, because what you're doing in the day-to-day is, in fact, so meaningful. But I'm hoping that some of the insights from this talk might seed a way of living and maybe sharing with your kids or your parents or your friends and teammates what really matters in a moment of time where AI has really been fueling a lot of our growth individually and from a corporate perspective. So in this class, Designing AI to Cultivate Human Well-Being, How Do Humans Thrive? Fei and I start by asking students why they take the class. This was a recent quote. I'm taking this class to better understand what creates a meaningful life so we can build technology that enhances the human experience. That student got an A. Just at the beginning, just like, why are you taking it? It's not a technology-based class, meaning you're not understanding the mechanisms of AI, but you're understanding how do we build algorithms that actually help us look from a long-term perspective how humans thrive. And on day 1, for the final project, we asked the students to envision their life in 50 years. Will the advances unleashed by AI in terms of how we spend time, how we live life, how we consume time, will it free us to devote more of ourselves to meaningful activities that may include creativity, self-awareness, kindness to others, empathy, wisdom, a sense of spirituality or purpose? Can we use AI at this cusp to be more human, to be better humans? And we need to think boldly and broadly, not only what is possible to build, but how do we build and promote a sense of purpose, equanimity, and love? One of the clearest ways to understand what really matters in our life is to understand the regrets of the dying. I've been lucky enough to be raised by my parents. My mom has been a hospice volunteer, as well as a teacher, but a servant volunteer for most all of my life. So we would spend most of our time around the dinner table. I have two sisters, talking about what people regret in their last days of life or wish for, because that was her job, is to listen and to see if she could at least maybe help those wishes come true. Because we're a fun family, and that's what fun families do. They talk about, wishes about what people did during their life. And I wanted to clarify, this work I think is so important, or the insights that come from this work are so important, because not just so much because it helps us sort of reverse engineer, how we might actually live our life, but at the individual level, but it also gives us a sense of collective critical insight about how we want to live our future, not here, obviously, just at Stanford, but in the world, societally. So I wanted to share 4 of the most common regrets or wishes that people mention. Authenticity. They wish that they had been more authentic, more them. And that's hard to do. It's hard to go be authentic. Some people kind of naturally seem to be that way, and others it's kind of awkward. But what we talk about in our story class is this idea of just feeling authentic. Do you know those moments where you just feel authentic? And that's often a better compass toward mitigating that regret. Presence. People mention, I just wish I savored more, like just these small little moments of holding hands with my child, or sharing a cup of coffee with my parent or a team member, just being present. Humor, they wish that they had not taken themselves so seriously. And this is something that's expressed in one of the most serious moments of one's life. They wish that they had allowed for joy and humor and not necessarily chased happiness, short-run happiness so much, but did very serious things, not taking themselves so seriously. And love. I wish I had the chance to say, I love you one more time. And I remember asking my mom, who is it that they want to say, I love you to one more time? And it's not always like my child or my parent or partner or whatever. It's often like someone, estranged, or someone you hadn't talked to in a long time, or a cousin or a sibling where there was a falling out. So, and I always thought that was so interesting, because if people regretted or wanted to be able to express, I love you one more time, why not just kind of bake that into our natural conversation? I remember when Andy, my husband, and I started dating, and I told him about this work, and I said, instead of saying goodbye, why don't we just say love? Because, goodbye has 2 syllables and love only has 1, so you're gonna save a lot of time. If you just calculate how much time you would save over your life course, very efficient. Also, by definition, you would never have this regret. So I, of course, sign off with XOXO, relentlessly. So do not be scared if you get a note from me that says XOXO. Do not worry. It's just my desire to never have that regret when I die, and we never know when we will. So what I wanted to do is talk a little bit about each of these 4 things. Authenticity. I wish I had the courage to live a life that was truer to me. And we know that what that means changes over the life course, but one of the best ways to understand who you are and have a sense of authenticity is story. I'm going to share a little bit of the science of story in this video. Oh my God, it's so good. So story is where you're basically taking people on a roller coaster, right? You're here, and then, there's a conflict, and then there's a resolution. And there's research to show that when we know our own stories, even if we don't share those stories, we feel more not just authentic about who we are. It's actually highly correlated with lower levels of anxiety and lower levels of depression relative to individuals who don't feel like they know their own stories. And these correlational studies are also backed up with other studies where causation is actually indicated, where individuals are trained on, like, what are your stories? And then they figure out what are the through lines that actually make sense of my stories, and you see the same type of effect. So we train our students at the early days of the class to just share a 6-word story about themselves. Ernest Hemingway was once known to have shared one. He wrote, "Baby shoes for sale, never worn." So we don't know if that is a story about a couple who couldn't have a baby, or if this is a story about someone who had a baby and the baby did not live. But we make the inference of what the meaning is. And when your brain makes the inference of that story versus I tell you, I had a friend and she couldn't have a baby. When I tell you that, the chance that you'll remember that story in a year's time is negligible. When you make the inference around the meaning of the story, you're about 22 times more likely to actually remember it in a year's time. This is work done by Gordon Bauer, a pioneering psychologist here at Stanford. So we always start our class asking people to write down 6-word stories about their life. And they don't have to be big epic ones. They can be just like sort of small ones that describe their life right now. Here are a few. Not quite aspiring to be quite. Tonight he packs, tomorrow I pine. Married the wrong guy, fixed it. And getting old, ringtones piss me off. Now, again, these don't all have to be big epic stories, but all of these stories are, what we call good stories because they have some transformation, right? So not quite aspiring to be quite. Married the wrong guy, fixed it. Even getting old, ringtones piss me off, has a sort of a temporal nature to the change. What we show in the research is that when you just share a 6-word story about yourself at the beginning of class versus we do it at the end of class, and then we ask people, how connected do you feel? How much do you want to go have a beer with the people around you? And how much did you learn the subsequent information? The order of magnitude of the individuals who actually shared a 6-word story at the beginning of a session is about 2 times greater on all of those metrics than if you don't. There's something about sharing a story, especially one that feels and is authentic, that allows people to understand you. It accelerates the closeness between individuals. So know your signature stories, and those signature stories we really define as intriguing, authentic, involving stories where people know why you're sharing it. Secretary of State Madeleine Albright came into our class about 5 years ago, and she had this list of 10 signature stories that defined her role as Secretary of State. So the students are so excited, and she's like, which one do you want to pick? She has 6-word titles for all of them, and they're like, can you tell the story about the Russian foreign minister? So she starts off and she says, I'm supposed to negotiate with the Russian foreign minister. She hears that he had bugged the US State Department, which is a serious breach of international diplomacy. So she's wondering what to do, and she decides she's gonna walk in, and she decides to wear a gigantic bug pin. It was so big, like it was a 4-inch big bug pin. And she shares how the tension in the room completely changed, and he couldn't help but smile. And it completely changed the subsequent conversation. And he interacted with her much more like Madeleine than Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, and it was so much more productive. And she happens to love, authentically, jewelry, and so she has all of these different pins. So the question is, what are your signature stories that illuminate something about you that actually are used as a goal to disarm or improve relationships? Satya Nadella, every Friday for his direct reports, he has someone on the 20-person team to start the meeting off with a story of awe, where they couldn't believe how impressive an employee, a volunteer, a partner were, and they share that story, and it colors the tenor of the subsequent conversation with his direct reports. You can even put these little stories in your notes. So we have one of our guests in class who shared yesterday his Google, his notes document where he just writes down little titles, sometimes puts on a picture, and he just takes notes of those different signature stories to share them at cocktail parties or other things, and it really does humanize him, and it accelerates, again, some of his goals. By the way, I make my kids do 6-word stories every night, and just like, what was the 6-word story of the day? Like 10 seconds, just write it down. And they did it. They listened for a long time. They no longer do, but for a very long time they do. And it encourages your kids to look at resilience, look at that transformation, not just winning, 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 achieve, 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 but what were the actual plot twists and changes that might define them as a person. So know your signature stories, collect the stories of others around you, and understand how to make a practice of sharing those stories and creating space for your colleagues to do the same. Number 2, presence. I wish I just savored small moments more. They define me more than I knew. And now this seems like it should be pretty easy, but it's often harder than we think. Research by Sepp Kamvar, Cassie Meg-Gilner, and I show that our meaning of happiness shifts in pretty dramatic ways over the life course. So this is based on 12 million data points. We wrote an algorithm that combs the blogosphere for all mentions of I feel and I am feeling. So we could do a semantic analysis on that 12 million data points. So when people say I feel happy and excited, I get to go to this star event tomorrow, and that's what I'm looking forward to. So we can basically pull out that data and see what people are saying when they say I feel happy. The way to read this slide is we start out simple. So these are 11 to 14-year-olds. Does anyone have an 11 to 14-year-old? Okay, when you say, like, how are you doing, they say, fine. Like, what did you do today? Nothing. All day, they did nothing. It's impossible, but somehow. So they don't have this rich emotional lexicon. So they don't really say anything. But we soon fill up with the angst. Around 15 to 18, they feel very angsty. When they do feel happy, it means excitement, which is a very angsty form of happiness. And feelings of confinement around 20, they don't feel known. They don't feel like they know themselves. They don't feel others know them. Until we leave those feelings behind to conquer the world. Around 25, the feeling of money, power, and status, or the opportunity to get those things, often correlates with happiness, more so than other stages of life. Before gradually trading ambition for balance, around 30, they start to realize they don't have balance in their life. They need health or spirituality or friendship and these other components. Developing appreciation for our physical bodies. So at 35, they've mysteriously gone downhill, and they realize they need to get back. And our children, they're only as happy as their least happy child. An evolving sense of connectedness for which we feel grateful, happy, calm, and blessed. And it's not that people die at 60, it's just that the sample size decreases substantially. So I always have to don't worry, you're gonna be fine. People just stop blogging because they have real relationships. So the meaning of happiness migrates from excitement, that's what it means, to conquering the world, to a sense of calm and peacefulness and presence. But the large majority of our life is spent thinking about the future, anxious about the future, wanting to conquer the world in the future. And it's not until later that we start to not be so focused on the future. So we spend this majority of life worried about the future, but what our future selves want, what people on their deathbed say they want, they wish that they had been more present in the day-to-day. So it's like you're drinking, when you're drinking a cup of coffee or tea, and then all of a sudden, you look down and it's gone. Like, that's your life. We don't want that to be your life. You want to be able to appreciate the coffee in the coffee cup. So the question is, how do we really be here for the short time that we are here on this earth? And one way is to find beauty in mundane moments. So I'm going to have you all close your eyes again and recall a beautiful moment you had in the last week. So recall a beautiful moment you had in the last week. All right, now that you have that moment, I wanted to share a set of studies that I've been doing with a set of colleagues here at Stanford. We do this, and we actually, in the Sustainable Human Behavior class, we have individuals share a beautiful moment every single day with a 4-person team, 2 Doors School students and 2 GSB students, and they get to know each other by sharing these beautiful moments over the course of a month. And what we find in the data is when you ask people to share that beautiful moment versus a happy moment, a grateful moment, an awe-evoking moment, all sorts of other positively valenced moments, that something very special happens. Number one, those individuals train to have their brain think about, is this a beautiful moment, or recall a beautiful moment. They say that they are not only significantly more present in the moment, even just asking yourself, is this my beautiful moment, brings your brain to the moment, and you start to savor that moment. We also show that the time expands in those mundane moments found in beauty, that there's an increased level of self-awareness, like now I understand myself actually better, because happiness and gratefulness and all of these are positive emotions, but they tend to be more generic. What brings you happiness might be the same thing that brings me happiness, or more often than beautiful moments. But beauty, what you seem to find is a beautiful moment, tends to be more unique to you. And 1 month later, they're much more likely to recall those beautiful moments than any other type of moment that we've studied. Now, when you ask people, what is your beautiful moment, as we've done with all sorts of people in the last 3 years, you will find that something quite unique to how they operate in the world is revealed to you. For example, Chef Michael Mina, who has 40 restaurants, I had a recent conversation with him, and I said, where do you find beauty? Where is a beautiful moment for you? And he says, I find beauty in these small moments in the kitchen. So he has these 40 restaurants. He can't be at all 40 restaurants. And he goes into the kitchen, and he looks at just at one thing, which is, how are the tomatoes sliced? And he finds that the best signal in the kitchen of beauty, not just in the moment, but also extended beauty, like how the dishes are going to show up, is what do the tomatoes look like? He's like, I don't need to see the dish. I don't need to go out into the restaurant. I just need to see what the tomatoes look like. And what he says is if there's a clean dishcloth underneath, it's not dripping, and the knife is sharp, and the tomatoes are cut nicely, everything else flows. He also says in those moments, the team in the kitchen is kind of like a sort of fish in a fishbowl. They're all kind of operating in the same cycle. People are physically more resilient, they're less burned out, it's better for the body, and that is not only a great indicator of beauty across all 40 of his restaurants as a way of scaling, but it's also an indicator of being more present and also having a better chance of having well-being, physical and emotional. We know last year 75% of people, not just in the US, but more generally, reported burnout, which is this emotional state that leads to often disengagement. Intentionally seeking beauty in the mundane allows us to re-engage, be more present in the moment, and it's a way to combat burnout and increase well-being. So I encourage you to do that, and by the way, if you want any sort of tips on how to do that, feel free to reach out to me, and we can send you a digital care package of each of our classes, actually, but also this research. Third is humor. I wish I didn't take myself so seriously. So when you ask people, did you smile or laugh a lot yesterday? 1.4 million people, we asked that too with the help of Gallup. People say yes around 16, 18, 20, and they start to say no right around 23 when they go to work. And they don't start saying yes again until like around 80. Average life expectancy is about 78, so that little comedic blip is not overly useful for many of us. And so the question is why? And we know it is associated with work, where we often take ourselves so seriously, because when we ask the question on a weekend, you get a significant scaling effect. So people are, in fact, laughing on weekends, just not during the weekday. So what's happening when people laugh together is that there's a neurological shift. So our brain releases a cocktail of hormones. We release endorphins, giving us a feeling similar to a runner's high. We lower our cortisol, giving us a feeling kind of like 5 minutes of meditation. And we release dopamine, which is the hormone released during certain types of physical touch. So, as far as our brains are concerned, laughing together is similar to running, meditating, and having sex all at the same time. So it's very efficient. Also, HR is fine with it. So it's this thing that's just so remarkable, and many of us have friendships where just joint laughter defines it. We know that laughter is the best medicine. It turns out actually, actual medicine is the best medicine, but laughter, is a close second. Now, what's really important as you teach humor in this class that we do is just making people understand being funny is not the same thing as having a sense of humor. Everyone has a sense of humor. Even if you do not think you have a sense of humor, you have a sense of humor, and there's a style associated with your humor. So over the last decade, Naomi Bagdonis and I have run hundreds of thousands of subjects through what we call a humor typology quiz, and we found that there's 4 very different styles of humor. So I'm going to ask you which style you think you are dominantly. First are the stand-ups, and they are bold and irreverent, natural entertainers. They come alive in front of a crowd. They're pretty extroverted. Then there's sweethearts. They're warm, inclusive, understated. They keep it PG-13. They may not think they are funny, but they actually are. If you look at their humor, it's very inclusive, more warm. Then there's snipers. They're dry, edgy, sarcastic, masters of the unexpected dig. It's kind of hard to make them laugh, but when you do, you feel really good. And then there's magnets, and they are uplifting and expressive and charismatic. They walk into the room, it kind of lights up. They might use humor too much. They laugh, or they're very generous with their laughter. They're unafraid to be silly, a little bit more physical with their humor. So I'm going to have you quickly stand up if your dominant style is a stand-up. So stand up if your dominant style. If you really are 2 styles, you can stand up twice. Okay, fantastic. You will be petrified to know that when I asked that question on Monday, like half of my class stood up. So we're like, wow, we're going to get roasted in this class. Fantastic. Stand up if your dominant style is a sweetheart. Okay, a fair amount, maybe 1/3. Stand up if your dominant style is sniper. Oh my goodness. Look at you, all you volunteers who are also snipers. All right, and magnet. Stand up if you're a magnet. Fantastic. All right, sit down. So we got a pretty good distribution in this room. Now, what's really important about this is that we find that when you understand your own humor style, that you not only understand what makes you laugh and what lights you up, but you can also understand and start to read the room on others. So for example, with my kids, I make them do this humor style quiz. You can go to humorseriously.com and take this 2-minute quiz, which I force my kids to do after they stop doing the 6-word story exercise. And because I will never give up. We will always do surveys in our house. So at one point, one of my sons had a lot of serial killer jokes, which is worrisome, because as a mom, you're thinking, how am I going to find therapy for this? Now, it turns out he's a sniper sweetheart. And all of a sudden, the jokes kind of landed in a very different way at the dinner table. And I was more generous with my laughter, and he was more generous with my laughter as he understood me. It completely changed the dinner conversation. So you read your room, understand what it is for others in your life, but also understand that each humor style has its own different downside or risk. So for example, on the right-hand side, stand-ups and snipers, these individuals often tease as a sign of affection. So I'm making fun of you because I like you. It's a sign of affection. Yet it doesn't always land that way, and so they can easily, inadvertently, alienate or offend. And on the other side, you see magnets and sweethearts that are often quite inclusive in their humor, and they can really bring individuals together, and yet they're at risk to over-index on self-deprecation, which is a very powerful tool, self-deprecation, but it's really effective at high status levels. At lower status levels, it can really boomerang. So just understanding what are the strengths and the weaknesses of each of these humor styles allows you to actually shift your style in the moment to meet the moment where it should be. So much about being competent is knowing when humor is needed, just like in the Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright story. So the other thing is to tell truth with levity. This is not, again, about being funny. This is just about stating truth, but with a little bit of levity. So all you do is you notice what's true. Take sort of a journal and just like notice what is true in your life, and then think about sharing it with a misdirection. Laughter springs neurologically from the unexpected. And it's not about becoming a comedian. It's just about looking at the world in a different way. So, for example, there's two types of travelers. Raise your hand if you are, oh my God, I forgot to pack underwear again. Raise your hand if that's your person. Okay, and then raise your hand if you are the, I brought an extra year. Okay, oh my gosh. I'm gonna travel with all of you because that is fantastic. Wow, what a reliable group. Or who recognizes this? Sarah Cooper, who's a comedian, she's coming into our class on Tuesday. And she, when she came into our class last year, she drew this Delta's new seating chart, which is economy comfort, economy discomfort, economy agony, economy to the reckoning, where is your God now economy, Satan's den economy, and just poop. I want to bring us all back to March 2020, which I apologize to do, but let's just be with me for a second. And one of our co-lecturers, Connor D. Mignoman, who's also a CEO of a big volunteering organization, upskilling people called Merit America, he was on his first all-hands meeting. It happened to be on Zoom because COVID had hit. He was very nervous about doing this, and he didn't know what to do. You know, he had 100 faces staring at him on Zoom. And he said his, intro speech, and then he supposedly passed the baton to his co-CEO to take over. And he inadvertently leaves his screen share on, and so everyone's petrified. And he goes to Google, he opens up Chrome, and he types in things that inspirational CEOs say during hard times. And like he comes back to the Zoom and everyone's like lost it. And he's like, I want you to trust me. I am here for you. And he says that, the people changed the way that they responded to that all hands because within, 30 seconds, he was able to diffuse and disarm all of the tension. People later came back to him and said it changed the way that they actually could take risks and look about their look in the future. The research shows that leaders with a sense of humor, any sense of humor, are seen as about 28% more motivating and admired. Their teams are about 15% more engaged. They tend to be twice as creative when they're solving a creative challenge. And I want to underscore, this is like any sense of humor. My leader has a sense of humor, correlates with all of these positive benefits. So it's not only about not living a life with regret, but it's also understanding how to unlock productivity and performance within your teams, your families, and life. Harness your humor style, tell the truth with levity, and shift your mindset, living life on the precipice of a smile. All right, the last is love. I wish I had the chance to say I love you one more time. So this may seem hard in the context of the world that we're living in. What does love even really mean? And one way to operationalize it or think about this is that we know from the research on meaning and purpose that people want to be valued members of a winning team on an inspired mission. People want to be valued. They want to feel like they're on a team. They want that team to be winning, and it doesn't have to be, market share. It could be whatever you define winning is. It could be we're losing right now, but we have a path forward to winning together. And you need to have that inspired mission. I remember once talking to Shantanu, the CEO of Adobe, and in this kind of offsite with his direct reports, we said, what is your purpose, your higher purpose, your inspired mission? And he said, our purpose is to hit 5 billion in 5 years. And you could see his whole team look depleted, and he noticed it too. It was incredibly observant. And he immediately shifted and he said, it's to unlock creativity in the world. To unlock creativity in the world. And all of a sudden, the CMO sort of saw her direct relationship between what she does in the day-to-day and driving that outcome. It was harder to see that with 5 billion in 5 years. And the CFO said later on to me that it was the first time he actually talked to his kids over the dinner table about what he does at work. They hit 5 billion in 3.5 years, and he highly correlates it with this conversation with his team because it was very aligned with their financial goals. But understanding that inspired mission, what are we all here to do, and what is our unique role on that team becomes so important. Stephen Curry, I think, does a really good job of harnessing this. He argues that we win when everyone touches the ball, when we are aligned in flow and everyone has an opportunity to feel valued and involved, connected to our higher mission. And if you follow basketball, you see there's times that correlate with their performance, before the playoff opportunity and since then, when they really do feel connected to an inspired mission and everyone does know their role on the team. So I'm gonna have you close your eyes one last time. Everyone close your eyes. Think of someone who has loved you deeply. Imagine them standing in front of you and take a deep breath in, count to 2. And then as you breathe out, I want you to imagine the way they look at you, their eyes and their smile, and notice how you feel right now. Imagine in their presence you feel known and unconditionally loved. Okay, you can open your eyes. So in one set of studies, my co-authors and I did that loving kindness meditation, and people stayed in that state for 5 minutes. With a different set of subjects, we gave them a personal strength meditation, which had them actually just focus on their uniqueness and unique strengths. And then we gave them a set of things to do afterwards. And the individuals in the loving kindness meditation, where they simply meditated on love, they were 3 times more likely to do something like give up their seat to another person in the lab. Kids who we did this on and trained them gave about 23% more of their stickers away to others, which is a fantastic dependent variable. And other pro-social behaviors also ensue. The results here show that the mere thought of love, even if you don't express it, becomes manifested in these small, concrete, and kind acts. And we find that when love exists, grace often follows. How you act with grace has this extraordinary impact on how people respond to you. Now, love can be communicated in small ways. You don't have to just be relentless in my XOXO, which, by the way, I make my kids do on text as well. Or you can also just put a heart. You can say, I loved your ideas, instead of saying thanks. Instead of asking someone, what do? You ask, what do you love to do? These prompts, these primes, these small linguistic changes, or even small habits of just looking in someone's eyes and being present, that can be enough to make someone feel valued and seen. So I wanted to end with an invitation to be here until we are not is our best shot at living a meaningful life that will be remembered after we are gone. That the people we unapologetically love, the authentic path we chart, our radical presence and generosity of laughter will not just replace short-run happiness and deep purpose while we're here, but it will transcend even after we're gone. So I'd like to sign off with love. We are so greatly appreciative, and we see you, we value you, we're so thankful. And together, I think what Stanford can do in our society is nothing short of really remarkable. Thank you all so much.